The music stopped the moment Julian Ashford let go of Alara Whitmore's hand. She stood frozen in the middle of the grand ballroom, her white-gloved fingers still curved in the shape his hand had left behind. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her. The candlelight from the great chandeliers above seemed suddenly too bright, too harsh, as if the whole room had been waiting for this exact moment to watch her fall apart. "I am sorry, Alara," Julian said, his voice steady, almost bored, as though he were canceling a dinner reservation rather than ending an engagement in front of the entire royal court. "This is not going to work. Not anymore." For a heartbeat, Alara thought she had misheard him. The orchestra had only just finished the third dance of the evening. Her cheeks were still flushed from spinning across the floor with him minutes earlier, laughing at something he had whispered in her ear. Now that same mouth was speaking words that felt like ice sliding down her spine. "Julian," she said quietly, glancing around at the crowd that had begun to gather, "not here. Please, not like this." But Julian had already turned his back to her. He crossed the ballroom floor with unhurried steps, his tailored blue coat catching the light, and stopped beside a woman in a shimmering gold gown. Lady Vivienne Cross smiled at him the way a cat smiles at a bowl of cream. She looped her arm through his as if she had been waiting for this exact moment all evening. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Fans fluttered, someone gasped. Somewhere near the back, a woman whispered to her companion loud enough for half the room to hear, "Poor girl, left standing like a forgotten coat." Alara felt her throat tighten. She wanted to run, to disappear through the tall arched doors behind her and never come back. But her feet would not move. Shame had rooted her to the marble floor, and pride refused to let her collapse in front of people who had never truly liked her, people who had only tolerated her because of Julian's name. She was the daughter of a merchant, not a duchess, not a countess, not born with a title stitched into her very existence. She had spent 2 years learning how to walk, how to speak, how to smile in rooms like this one, all so she could stand beside Julian without embarrassing him. And in one sentence, spoken as casually as a comment about the weather, he had erased every bit of that effort. "I always knew she didn't belong here," someone said behind a raised fan. "Merchant blood," another voice added, "no matter how fine the dress." Alara's eyes stung, but she refused to let a single tear fall. Not here, not now. She lifted her chin, the way her mother had taught her to do whenever the world tried to make her feel small, and she began walking toward the edge of the room, toward the tall windows that overlooked the palace gardens. She needed air. She needed to be anywhere but under the weight of all those staring eyes. She had almost reached the window when a deep, calm voice stopped her. "Miss Whitmore." She turned, startled, and found herself looking up into a pair of steady gray eyes. Duke Alaric Sinclair stood before her, tall and composed, dressed in black and silver, a man the entire court spoke of in hushed, careful tones. He was known for his sharp mind, his cold reputation, and his refusal to attend more than a handful of royal events each year. Everyone said he found court gatherings tiresome. Yet here he was, standing directly in front of her, at the exact moment her world had crumbled. "Your Grace," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I would rather not be seen right now if it is all the same to you." "That is precisely why I am here," he said. His tone was not unkind, but it carried no pity either, which she was grateful for. Pity would have broken what little composure she had left. "Would you do me the honor of a dance?" Alara blinked. "A dance, Your Grace, I have just been." "I am aware of what has just happened," he said simply. "The entire room is aware, which is exactly why you should not walk away as though you have something to hide. Walk away because you chose to leave, not because you were pushed." She stared at him, trying to understand why a man of his standing, a man who barely spoke 2 words to anyone at these events, would offer his hand to a woman who had just been humiliated in front of the entire kingdom. But there was something steady in his gaze, something that made her feel, for the first time all evening, that she was not entirely alone. "Why would you do this?" she asked quietly. "Because cruelty performed in public deserves to be answered in public," he said, "and because I do not enjoy watching a person be treated unfairly." Ilara hesitated only a moment longer before placing her gloved hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and sure, nothing like the cold emptiness Julian had left behind. The orchestra, sensing the shift in the room, began to play again, a slow and elegant waltz. Alaric led her onto the floor, and together they began to move. Whispers followed them, but this time the whispers carried a different weight. No longer pity but curiosity. No longer mockery but something closer to astonishment. The Duke of Sinclair, a man who had turned down dances from countesses and princesses alike, was dancing with the merchant's daughter who had just been abandoned by her fiancé. Across the room, Julian's smile faltered as he watched them. Vivienne noticed the change in his expression and followed his gaze, her own smile tightening at the sight of Ilara moving gracefully in the Duke's arms. "It seems your former betrothed has found new company," Vivienne said, an edge creeping into her voice. Julian said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He had expected Ilara to shrink away in humiliation, to disappear from the ballroom in tears, giving him the freedom to move forward with his new alliance without a second thought. He had not expected the Duke of Sinclair, of all people, to step forward and claim her hand. "It changes nothing," Julian muttered, though the confidence in his voice had thinned considerably. Back on the dance floor, Ilara focused on the steady rhythm of the music and the calm, unwavering presence of the man across from her. "You did not have to do this," she said softly. "I know," Alaric replied. "I chose to." "Everyone will talk." Everyone was already talking, he pointed out, and for the briefest moment the corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close enough to soften the sharp lines of his face. "Better they talk about something worth discussing." Ilara felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, chasing away some of the cold humiliation that had settled there only minutes before. She studied his face as they turned across the floor, searching for some hidden motive, some reason a man like him would risk his own reputation to defend a woman he barely knew. But she found none, only quiet resolve. The dance ended too soon. Alaric bowed slightly, and Ilara offered a small curtsy in return, unsure of what to say. Before she could speak, he leaned in slightly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Lord Ashford has made a grave mistake tonight," he said. "And I intend to make certain he understands the full weight of it." There was no anger in his voice, no dramatic promise shouted for effect. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered with the same calm certainty a man might use to describe the weather or the time of day. Yet something in the way he said it sent a small shiver down Ilara's spine, not of fear, but of quiet certainty that he meant every word. Across the room, Julian watched the exchange with narrowed eyes, though he could not hear what had been said. He excused himself from Vivienne's side and made his way toward one of his closest friends, Lord Edmund Caro, who had witnessed the entire scene with wide eyes. "What was that?" Edmund asked under his breath. "The Duke of Sinclair dancing with her." "He never dances with anyone." "It means nothing," Julian said again, though this time the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "It did not look like nothing," Edmund replied. "It looked like a warning." Julian glanced across the ballroom one more time, watching as Ilara was gently guided toward a quiet corner by the Duke, away from the prying eyes and sharp tongues of the crowd. For the first time that night, a flicker of doubt crept into his chest, though he quickly pushed it aside, telling himself that his choice had been the right one, that wealth and status mattered more than sentiment, that Vivienne's family connections would open doors Ilara never could. But as the evening wore on, and more guests began whispering about the Duke's unexpected intervention, Julian found it harder and harder to convince himself that he had made the right choice. Near the tall windows overlooking the moonlit gardens, Alaric offered Ilara a glass of water, watching her carefully as she tried to steady her breathing. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did tonight. I do not know how I will ever repay such kindness." "You do not need to repay it," he said. "But you should know something about me, Miss Whitmore. I do not make promises lightly, and I do not forget when someone I respect is treated unfairly." Ilara looked up at him, searching his calm gray eyes for any trace of exaggeration, but found none. "You truly intend to do something about this?" "I intend to ensure Lord Ashford understands there are consequences to cruelty," Alaric said simply. "Whether he realizes it tonight or not, he has made an enemy far more patient than he expects." Outside, the moon hung low over the palace gardens, casting silver light across the manicured hedges and quiet fountains. Inside, the ball continued, music and laughter filling the grand hall as though nothing unusual had happened at all. But for Alara Whitmore, standing beside a man the entire kingdom feared and respected in equal measure, nothing would ever feel the same again. She did not yet know it, but the humiliation she had suffered that night would become the very thing that changed the course of her life forever. And somewhere across the ballroom, Julian Ashford would soon discover that some mistakes could not be undone with wealth, status, or charm alone. The night was only beginning. The morning after the ball, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Whitmore townhouse, but Alara felt none of its warmth. She sat by her dressing table, staring at her own reflection, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at her. Dark circles ringed her eyes from a sleepless night, and the memory of Julian's cold words kept replaying in her mind over and over, like a wound that refused to close. Her maid, a gentle older woman named Margaret, moved quietly around the room, unwilling to disturb her mistress's silence. It was Margaret who finally spoke first. "There is a letter for you, miss," she said softly, holding out a folded piece of parchment sealed with dark wax. "It arrived just this morning." Alara took the letter with trembling fingers, half expecting it to be from Julian, offering some hollow apology or a demand that she return the jewelry he had gifted her during their engagement. But when she broke the seal, she recognized the elegant, precise handwriting immediately. It was not from Julian at all. The letter was from Duke Alaric Sinclair. "Miss Whitmore, I hope this letter finds you well, though I understand that may be difficult given the events of last evening. I wish to inform you that I have arranged a private meeting with my solicitor this afternoon, one that may prove useful to you given your current circumstances. If you are willing, please join me at 3 o'clock at my residence on Ashcombe Street. I promise this is not a request made lightly, nor one meant to draw further attention to your situation. Quite the opposite. Yours in sincerity, Alaric Sinclair." Alara read the letter twice, her brow furrowing in confusion. A solicitor? What business could the Duke possibly have that involved her? She folded the letter carefully and pressed it against her chest, feeling a strange mixture of curiosity and caution. "What does it say, miss?" Margaret asked, unable to hide her curiosity. "It seems the Duke of Sinclair wishes to see me again," Alara said slowly. "He mentions a solicitor." Margaret's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "The Duke himself. Sending you a personal letter the very morning after the ball. Miss Alara, do you understand what that means? The whole city will be talking about nothing else by nightfall." "I am aware," Alara said, though a small part of her could not deny the flicker of anticipation stirring in her chest. After the humiliation of the previous night, the idea that someone, anyone, still saw value in her presence felt like a lifeline she had not expected to receive. By the time the carriage arrived to take her to Ashcombe Street, word of the ball had already spread through every corner of the city. Alara could feel the stares as she stepped out of her home, the whispers of neighbors gathered near their windows, the way conversations seemed to pause the moment she passed by. She kept her chin lifted, just as she had the night before, refusing to let the judgment of strangers dictate how she carried herself. The Duke's residence was a grand stone building, its architecture both elegant and imposing, much like the man himself. A footman greeted her at the door and led her through a wide hallway lined with portraits of solemn ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to follow her every step. She was shown into a study where Duke Alaric stood waiting beside a tall, thin man in spectacles, who was introduced as Mr. Harold Bennet, the Duke's solicitor. "Miss Whitmore," Alaric said, offering a small bow of greeting. "Thank you for coming. I hope the journey was not too difficult." "It was manageable," she replied, glancing between the two men with growing curiosity. "Though I admit I am uncertain why I am here." Alaric gestured toward a chair near the fireplace, and Alara took a seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Mr. Bennet cleared his throat and opened a leather folder resting on the table between them. "Miss Whitmore," he began, "I understand that during your engagement to Lord Ashford, certain financial agreements were made between your father's estate and the Ashford family, correct?" Alara blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift into matters of business. "Yes, that is correct. My father provided a considerable dowry as part of the arrangement. And given the abrupt end of the engagement last evening," Bennet continued, "it is customary, under the laws of this kingdom, for that dowry to be returned in full, along with any additional damages owed for breach of promise, particularly when the engagement was ended publicly and without proper cause." Alara's eyes widened. In the chaos of the previous night, she had not once considered the financial consequences of Julian's actions. Her father had worked tirelessly to secure that dowry, hoping to elevate their family's standing through her marriage. Losing that money, on top of the public humiliation, would have been a devastating blow to her family's future. "I did not realize such a thing was possible," she admitted quietly. "Julian's family holds considerable influence. I assumed pursuing such a claim would be pointless." "Normally," Bennet said, glancing briefly at Alaric, "such claims are difficult to pursue against families of significant status, particularly when the offended party lacks powerful connections of their own. However, in this case, you now have the support of the Duke of Sinclair, whose influence within the royal court is second to very few." Alara turned to look at Alaric, who remained composed, though there was something unmistakably deliberate in the calm set of his jaw. "You arranged this," she said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "This is what you meant last night, when you said he would regret what he had done." "Among other things," Alaric said simply, "Lord Ashford believed that ending your engagement publicly would cost him nothing beyond a few days of gossip. I intend to demonstrate otherwise." "But why?" Alara asked, her voice softer now, genuine confusion coloring her words. "You do not know me, your grace. We spoke only once briefly before last night. Why would you go to such lengths on my behalf?" Alaric was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her carefully, as though weighing how much of the truth he wished to share. "Because I have watched men like Julian Ashford move through this court for years," he finally said, "using people for their own advancement, discarding them the moment they are no longer useful, and facing no consequences whatsoever for the harm they cause. I grew tired of watching it happen without ever intervening. Last night, I chose not to look away." Mr. Bennet, sensing the personal nature of the conversation, quietly excused himself from the room, leaving Alara and Alaric alone beside the crackling fire. "There is something else you should know," Alaric continued once the door had closed. "Lord Ashford's engagement to Lady Vivienne Cross is not the advantageous match he believes it to be. Her family's fortune is not nearly as secure as public rumor suggests. Several of their business ventures have failed quietly over the past year, hidden behind a carefully maintained appearance of wealth." Alara's eyes widened. "You believe Julian does not know this?" "I am certain he does not," Alaric said. "He abandoned a genuine, secure alliance in favor of one built on illusion, all because he believed status alone could carry him further than loyalty or character ever could. When the truth becomes known, and it will become known, his position within the court will suffer far more than mere gossip could ever achieve." Alara sat back in her chair, trying to process everything she had just learned. Only a day ago, she had been preparing for a future as Julian Ashford's wife, imagining a life built on partnership and shared ambition. Now that future had collapsed entirely, replaced by something far more uncertain, yet strangely, something that no longer felt entirely hopeless. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "I appreciate everything you are doing, truly I do. But I must ask, what do you gain from any of this? Reputation? Satisfaction? I cannot imagine a man of your standing involves himself so deeply in the affairs of others without some purpose of his own. A faint, almost reluctant smile touched the corner of Alaric's mouth. You are perceptive, Miss Whitmore. Very well, I will be honest with you. I do not enjoy injustice, that much is true. But I will admit, watching you stand tall last night, refusing to crumble despite the humiliation placed upon you, left an impression on me. I do not often find myself impressed by anyone within these court walls. Alara felt warmth rise to her cheeks, an unfamiliar sensation given everything that had happened over the past day. That is a rare compliment, Your Grace, especially from a man known throughout the kingdom for his restraint. I choose my words carefully, Alaric replied, which is precisely why you should trust that I mean them. Over the following hour, Mr. Bennet returned with additional documents, outlining the formal claim that would be filed against the Ashford family. Alara listened carefully, asking questions where necessary, slowly beginning to understand the full scope of what Alaric intended to set into motion. It was not simply about reclaiming a dowry. It was about ensuring that Julian Ashford, and anyone else who might consider treating another person so carelessly, understood there would be consequences for such cruelty. As the meeting drew to a close, Alaric personally escorted Alara to her waiting carriage. The afternoon sun had begun to soften into early evening, casting a warm golden light across the quiet street. Miss Whitmore, Alaric said as she prepared to step into the carriage, I understand this has been an overwhelming day on top of an already difficult night. But I want you to know that whatever happens next, you are not facing it alone. Alara turned to look at him, struck once again by the quiet sincerity in his expression. Thank you, Your Grace, truly. I do not know how I will ever repay your kindness. There is no debt to repay, he said, only an injustice to correct. As the carriage pulled away, Alara watched the Duke's tall figure grow smaller through the small rear window, her mind swirling with everything that had unfolded that day. She thought of Julian, likely celebrating his new alliance with Vivienne, entirely unaware of the storm quietly building against him. She thought of her father, who would need to be told everything that had happened, and how he would react to the news of a formal claim being filed against the Ashford family. But mostly, she thought of Alaric Sinclair, a man the entire court believed to be cold and unreachable, who had chosen, without hesitation, to stand beside a woman he barely knew simply because he could not tolerate watching cruelty go unanswered. For the first time since the humiliation of the previous night, Alara allowed herself to feel something other than shame. A quiet, steady spark of hope had begun to take root within her, fragile but undeniable, and she found herself wondering, for the first time, whether losing Julian Ashford might not be the tragedy she had first believed it to be. Somewhere across the city, in the grand estate of the Ashford family, Julian sat alone in his study, staring at an unopened letter that had arrived only an hour earlier, bearing the official seal of a royal solicitor. His hands trembled slightly as he broke the wax, unaware that the quiet, ordinary evening he had planned was about to be shattered entirely. The regret Alaric had promised the night before had only just begun. Julian's hands trembled as he read the letter for the third time, hoping the words might somehow change if he studied them long enough. They did not. The formal notice from the royal solicitor's office was written in precise legal language, but the meaning was unmistakable. A claim had been filed against the Ashford family for breach of promise, demanding the return of Alara Whitmore's dowry in full, along with additional compensation for the public nature of the humiliation she had suffered. He set the letter down on his desk and pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. This was not supposed to happen. Ending an engagement, even publicly, was hardly unheard of among the nobility. Reputations recovered from such things within weeks, sometimes days. He had expected gossip, perhaps a few uncomfortable conversations at future gatherings, but nothing of this magnitude. A knock sounded at his study door before it opened, and his father, Lord Reginald Ashford, stepped inside, his expression already tight with displeasure. He held a similar letter in his hand, the wax seal broken. "Explain this to me," Reginald said, his voice low and controlled in the way that Julian knew meant real anger simmered just beneath the surface. "Explain to me why the Ashford family is being formally accused of breach of promise, with a demand for damages that could cost us a significant portion of this year's income." "Father, I did not expect—" "You did not expect what exactly?" Reginald interrupted sharply. "That ending an engagement in the middle of the royal ball in front of half the kingdom's nobility might have consequences. Julian, I raised you to understand the importance of appearances, of alliances, of timing. What you did last night was reckless." "Vivienne Cross comes from one of the wealthiest families in the region," Julian said, trying to steady his voice. "Her connections could open doors that Alara's family never could." Reginald's expression darkened further. "Doors that Alara's family never could. Julian, her father's trading business has quietly become one of the most profitable ventures in the entire province. I approved that engagement because it made sound financial sense, not merely out of sentiment. And now, because of your impatience, we stand to lose not only that alliance, but a considerable sum of money as well." Julian opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He had been so certain of his decision the night before, so confident that trading Alara for Vivienne represented an obvious step upward. Now, faced with his father's fury and the very real threat of financial consequence, that confidence had begun to crumble. "There is something else," Reginald said, lowering his voice slightly. "I have heard rumors, unconfirmed as of yet, but concerning nonetheless, regarding the true state of the Cross family's finances." Julian's stomach tightened. "What kind of rumors?" "That several of their investments have failed over the past year," Reginald said. "That the wealth they display publicly may not be as secure as it appears. If this proves true, and you have entangled our family with theirs while simultaneously severing a genuinely profitable connection, the damage could be far worse than a simple financial claim." Julian sank into the chair behind his desk, his earlier confidence replaced entirely by a cold, creeping dread. He thought of the ballroom the night before, of the murmurs that had followed him as he crossed the floor toward Vivienne, and of the unexpected sight of Duke Alaric Sinclair leading Alara onto the dance floor. At the time, he had dismissed it as a minor inconvenience, a small blow to his pride at most. Now he began to wonder if it had been something far more calculated. "The Duke of Sinclair," Julian said slowly. "He danced with Alara last night. He spoke with her privately afterward." Reginald's eyes narrowed. The Duke of Sinclair does not concern himself with matters outside his own affairs. If he has taken an interest in Miss Whitmore's situation, it is not out of idle curiosity. Julian felt a chill settle over him as the pieces began to align in his mind. The timing of the claim, filed the very morning after the ball. The involvement of a royal solicitor, moving with unusual speed for such matters. The Duke's calm, deliberate words the night before, words Julian had not been close enough to hear, but had clearly left an impression on everyone who witnessed the exchange. "You believe the Duke is behind this," Julian said quietly. "I believe," Reginald replied, "that you have made a very serious mistake, and I intend to discover the full extent of it before this situation grows any worse." Over the following days, whispers began circulating through the royal court with increasing intensity. What had started as simple gossip about a broken engagement had evolved into something far more complicated. Nobles who once greeted Julian warmly now offered polite, distant nods, their eyes lingering a moment too long, as though reassessing his standing within their carefully constructed social hierarchy. At a garden luncheon hosted by Baroness Caldwell, Julian found himself seated near several acquaintances who had once eagerly sought his company. The conversation, however, felt noticeably different from what he was accustomed to. "I heard the Duke of Sinclair personally intervened on Miss Whitmore's behalf," one guest remarked, glancing at Julian with poorly disguised curiosity. "Quite unusual, given his reputation for avoiding such entanglements." "Perhaps he simply felt compelled to correct an injustice," another guest added, her tone light but her meaning unmistakable. Julian forced a smile, though it felt brittle even to himself. I am certain the situation has been exaggerated through gossip, as these things often are. Exaggerated, the first guest replied, raising an eyebrow. I heard the claim filed against your family seeks a rather substantial sum. That hardly sounds like exaggeration. Julian excused himself shortly after, unable to bear the weight of polite scrutiny any longer. As he walked through the manicured garden paths, he caught sight of Lady Vivienne Cross approaching, her golden gown replaced today by a more modest afternoon dress, though her expression carried the same confident poise she always displayed. Julian, she greeted, though something in her tone felt cooler than it had 2 nights before. I heard about the claim being filed against your family. That is rather unfortunate. It is being handled, Julian said, though he was not entirely certain that was true. Vivienne studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes assessing him in a way that made him distinctly uncomfortable. My father mentioned something interesting this morning, she said carefully. He said he had heard rumors regarding your family's financial standing, questioning whether the Ashford estate might be facing difficulties given this unexpected claim. Julian's jaw tightened. There is no truth to that. I certainly hope not, Vivienne said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Because my family values stability above all else, Julian. We did not pursue this arrangement to entangle ourselves with instability. The conversation left Julian with an unsettling realization. Vivienne's family, the very people he had abandoned Alara for, were beginning to distance themselves at the first sign of financial trouble, exactly as his father had feared. The alliance he had believed would elevate his standing within the court was proving far more fragile than he had anticipated. That evening, Julian sought out his closest friend, Edmund Caro, hoping for some reassurance amid the growing chaos surrounding him. You look terrible, Edmund observed as Julian entered the private card room of their usual gentlemen's club. I feel terrible, Julian admitted, sinking into a leather chair across from his friend. Everything is falling apart, Edmund. The claim, the whispers, Vivienne's sudden coldness. I do not understand how one decision has caused so much damage. Edmund poured him a glass of brandy and slid it across the table. Perhaps it was not simply one decision, he said carefully. Perhaps it was the manner in which you made it. Ending things with Alara publicly, in front of the entire court, humiliating her so openly. That was always going to invite consequences, Julian. You simply did not expect those consequences to have teeth. The Duke of Sinclair, Julian said, staring into his glass. You think he is truly behind all of this? I think, Edmund said slowly, that the Duke of Sinclair does not involve himself in matters lightly. If he has chosen to defend Alara Whitmore, it is because he believes strongly in doing so, and men like him do not abandon their convictions easily. Julian rubbed his temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache building behind his eyes. What am I supposed to do, Edmund? I cannot undo what has already happened. No, Edmund agreed, but you could attempt to make amends. A private apology to Miss Whitmore, perhaps, or a willingness to settle the claim quietly, without further public embarrassment. Continuing to fight it, especially with the Duke's involvement, seems unwise. Julian considered his friend's words carefully, though pride still burned hot within his chest, resistant to the idea of admitting fault so openly. He had spent his entire life being taught that appearances mattered above nearly everything else, that showing weakness, even in the form of an apology, could be just as damaging as the original mistake. Meanwhile, across the city, Alara had begun adjusting to her new reality with a quiet determination that surprised even herself. She spent her mornings assisting her father with correspondence related to his trading business, and her afternoons occasionally visiting Duke Alaric's residence to review updates on the ongoing legal proceedings with Mr. Bennet. During one such visit, as autumn sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Alaric's study, Alara found herself studying the Duke with newfound curiosity. Over the past several days, she had come to see a side of him the rest of the court rarely witnessed, patient, thoughtful, and surprisingly attentive to details others might have overlooked entirely. "You seem distracted today, Miss Whitmore," Alaric observed, setting aside the documents he had been reviewing. "I apologize," Ilara said, offering a small smile. "I suppose I am simply still adjusting to how quickly everything has changed. A week ago, I was preparing for a wedding. Now I find myself in the middle of a legal battle I never anticipated, alongside a man the entire court views with a mixture of fascination and caution." Alaric's mouth curved slightly at her observation. Fascination and caution, an interesting combination, though not entirely inaccurate, I suppose. "May I ask you something personal, Your Grace?" Ilara said, gathering her courage. "You may ask," Alaric replied, "though I cannot promise an answer for every question." "Why have you never married?" she asked. "A man of your position, your influence, surely you have received countless proposals over the years." Alaric was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes drifting toward the window, as though considering how much of himself he wished to reveal. "I have received proposals, yes," he finally said. "But most were built on ambition rather than genuine connection. I grew tired long ago of being valued for my title rather than for who I actually am. So I chose solitude over settling for something hollow." Ilara felt a quiet ache of understanding settle in her chest. "That sounds remarkably lonely." "It has been at times," Alaric admitted, his voice softer than she had heard it before. "Though I find myself less inclined to dwell on that loneliness these past several days." Their eyes met across the study, and for a brief, charged moment, neither of them looked away. Ilara felt her heartbeat quicken, uncertain whether the sensation stemmed from the intensity of his gaze or the unexpected vulnerability in his words. She had come to this man seeking justice for the humiliation she had suffered, never expecting to find something else entirely blooming quietly beneath the surface of their unlikely alliance. "Your Grace," she began softly, "I—" A sharp knock interrupted them before she could finish, and Mr. Bennet entered the study, his expression grave. "Your Grace, Miss Whitmore, I apologize for the interruption, but there has been a development in the case. Lord Ashford's solicitor has requested an urgent meeting. It seems the Ashford family wishes to discuss a settlement." Alaric's expression shifted immediately into calm, calculated focus, though Ilara noticed the brief flicker of reluctance in his eyes as their private moment came to an abrupt end. "Very well," Alaric said, rising from his chair. "Let us hear what Lord Ashford has to say." As they prepared to meet with the Ashford family's representatives, Ilara felt a strange mixture of anticipation and nervousness settle over her. The battle she had never wanted to fight was reaching a critical turning point, and standing beside her, unwavering and resolute, was a man who had somehow become far more important to her than she had ever anticipated when this entire ordeal began. Whatever happened next, she knew with quiet certainty that she would not be facing it alone. The meeting room at the royal solicitor's office felt smaller than it truly was, the air thick with tension as both parties took their seats on opposite sides of a long, polished table. Julian sat beside his father, Lord Reginald, both men dressed in formal attire that did little to hide the discomfort evident on their faces. Across from them sat Ilara, composed and steady, with Duke Alaric seated beside her, his presence alone seeming to shift the balance of power in the room. Mr. Bennet opened the proceedings by reviewing the formal claim once again, outlining the terms being sought, the return of the dowry in full, along with compensation for the public nature of the broken engagement. Julian's solicitor, a thin, nervous man named Mr. Pierce, cleared his throat before speaking. "My clients wish to propose a settlement," he began carefully, "one that avoids further public scrutiny for all parties involved. The Ashford family is prepared to return the dowry in full, along with a modest additional sum, in exchange for a private resolution to this matter." Alaric leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression unreadable. "A modest sum," he repeated. "I assume you understand that the humiliation Miss Whitmore endured was anything but modest. She was abandoned in front of the entire royal court, her reputation deliberately damaged for the sake of a more advantageous alliance." Julian shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unable to meet Ilara's gaze directly. Reginald, however, spoke up before Julian could respond. "Your Grace," Reginald said, his tone carefully measured, "we understand the gravity of the situation, and we are prepared to make this right. However, the amount currently being sought would place significant strain on our family's finances. We ask for reasonable consideration." "Reasonable consideration," Alaric said slowly, "is precisely what was absent the night your son chose to end this engagement in the most public, most humiliating manner possible. If reasonable consideration had guided his actions then, we would not be sitting here now." The room fell silent for a long moment. Alara watched the exchange carefully, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and discomfort. Part of her wanted to see Julian and his family held fully accountable for the pain they had caused. Another part of her, quieter but no less present, felt a flicker of unease at watching Reginald Ashford, a man who had always treated her with courtesy during her engagement to Julian, now visibly strained under the weight of his son's mistake. "Your Grace," Alara said softly, drawing the attention of everyone in the room, "may I speak?" Alaric turned to her, surprise flickering briefly across his features before he nodded. "Of course, Miss Whitmore." Alara took a steadying breath before continuing. "I do not seek to destroy the Ashford family financially. I seek acknowledgement, a genuine understanding of the harm that was caused, and fair compensation for the damage done to my reputation and my family's standing. If Lord Ashford is willing to provide that, alongside the return of my dowry, I am willing to consider a resolution that does not seek to punish beyond what is fair." Julian looked up at her then, something unreadable crossing his face. Whether it was gratitude, guilt, or simple relief at the possibility of a less damaging outcome, Alara could not be certain. Reginald exchanged a glance with his solicitor before speaking again. "We appreciate your willingness to consider fairness, Miss Whitmore. Perhaps we can find common ground on the specific terms." Over the following hour, the two solicitors worked through the details, Alaric occasionally offering pointed clarifications whenever he felt the Ashford family's proposals fell short of genuine fairness. Alara remained largely quiet, watching the negotiations unfold, occasionally offering her own input when a particular term felt unjust. By the time the meeting concluded, a settlement had been reached. The dowry would be returned in full, along with a fair sum acknowledging the public humiliation Alara had endured. It was not the punishing outcome Alaric had initially sought, but it was a resolution both parties could accept without further prolonged conflict. As the meeting drew to a close and the various parties began gathering their belongings, Julian lingered near the doorway, clearly hoping for a private word with Alara. Alaric noticed the gesture, and after a brief glance toward Alara for silent permission, stepped aside to allow the conversation, though he remained close enough to intervene if necessary. "Alara," Julian said quietly once they stood apart from the others, "I wanted to say truly that I am sorry for how I handled everything. Not just the settlement, but that night. You deserved far better than what I gave you." Alara studied him carefully, searching for sincerity beneath his words. She found some, though it was tangled with the same self-interest that had always defined him. "I appreciate you saying that, Julian. But I hope you understand that an apology, however genuine, does not erase what happened. It simply allows us both to move forward." "I understand," Julian said, nodding slowly. "I hope in time you will find happiness. Genuinely, I do." "Thank you," Alara replied, though she could not bring herself to offer any warmth beyond simple politeness. Too much had happened for genuine friendliness to return so easily. As Julian turned to leave, Alaric stepped back to Alara's side, his expression unreadable, though there was a quiet tension in the set of his shoulders that had not been there moments before. "Are you well?" he asked once they were alone. "I am," Alara said, surprising herself with how true the words felt. "I think, for the first time since that night, I finally feel as though I have some control over my own future again." Alaric nodded, though his gaze remained fixed on her with an intensity she had grown increasingly aware of over the past several days. "Good," he said simply. "That is exactly how it should be." They walked together toward the waiting carriages outside, the autumn air crisp and cool against Alara's skin. As they reached her carriage, she turned to face him, suddenly reluctant to part ways so soon after everything they had just endured together. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "I know the legal matter has now been resolved. I do not wish to presume that our association must end simply because the case has concluded." A faint smile touched Alaric's lips, the first genuine smile she had seen from him since they had met. "I was hoping you might say something along those lines, Miss Whitmore. I confess, I have grown rather accustomed to your company these past several days." "As have I, Your Grace," Alara admitted, warmth spreading through her chest despite the cool autumn breeze. "Perhaps," Alaric said, "you might allow me to call on you properly, not as your legal advocate but simply as myself." Alara felt her heart flutter at the suggestion, a feeling entirely different from the anxious uncertainty that had plagued her since the night of the ball. "I would like that very much, Your Grace." "Alaric," he corrected gently, "if we are to move beyond legal proceedings, I believe we can dispense with formal titles, at least in private conversation." "Alaric," Alara repeated softly, testing the name on her tongue. "Then you must call me Alara as well." "Alara," he said, and the way he spoke her name sent a warm shiver through her entire body. As her carriage pulled away moments later, Alara glanced back to see Alaric still standing where she had left him, watching the carriage disappear down the street. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to imagine a future that did not revolve around humiliation or loss, but rather around genuine connection and quiet, steady hope. Meanwhile, across the city, Julian returned home to find his father waiting in the study, a troubled expression etched across his face. "The settlement is finalized," Reginald said as Julian entered, "though I suspect the true cost of your decision extends far beyond the sum we have agreed to pay." "What do you mean?" Julian asked. "I mean," Reginald said slowly, "that I have received further confirmation regarding the Cross family's financial troubles. It appears their situation is far worse than mere rumor suggested. Several of their creditors have begun pursuing legal action of their own." Julian felt the color drain from his face. Vivienne's family is facing collapse. "It would seem so," Reginald confirmed. "Which means the alliance you sacrificed a secure, profitable engagement for may soon become entirely worthless, both financially and socially." Julian sank into a nearby chair, the full weight of his earlier decision settling over him with crushing clarity. He had traded genuine loyalty and a stable future for an illusion of greater status, and now that illusion was beginning to crumble entirely, leaving him with nothing to show for the damage he had caused. Outside, evening settled over the city, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. In one part of town, Julian Ashford sat alone with the growing realization of his own mistakes. In another, Alara Whitmore allowed herself, for the first time in days, to smile freely, her heart lighter than it had been in what felt like a lifetime, filled with quiet anticipation for whatever might come next. The story of that fateful night at the royal ball had not yet reached its conclusion. But for Alara, the darkest chapter had finally begun to close, making way for something entirely unexpected to take root in its place. 3 weeks passed since the settlement had been finalized, and the city seemed to have found new gossip to occupy its attention, though whispers of the royal ball and its dramatic aftermath still occasionally surfaced in quiet corners of drawing rooms and garden parties. Alara had begun to notice a subtle shift in how she was perceived within court circles, no longer the pitiable figure abandoned at the altar of public opinion, but rather a woman who had weathered humiliation with grace and emerged stronger for it. Much of that transformation, she knew, could be traced directly back to her growing association with Duke Alaric Sinclair. Over the past several weeks, he had called on her regularly, always with careful propriety, respecting the boundaries expected of their still-new relationship while making his growing affection increasingly clear through small, thoughtful gestures. On this particular afternoon, Alara sat in the drawing room of her family home, reviewing an invitation that had arrived that morning. It was addressed to both her and her father, requesting their presence at a private gathering hosted by Duchess Cordelia Winthrop, one of the most respected and influential women within the royal court. "This is quite an honor," her father, Mr. Thomas Whitmore, remarked as he examined the elegant invitation over her shoulder. "The Duchess rarely extends invitations to families outside established nobility. I suspect this has more to do with my recent association with Duke Sinclair than any sudden interest in our family's standing," Alara said, though she could not entirely suppress the small smile tugging at her lips. "Does that trouble you?" her father asked gently. "Being valued, even partially, because of his influence rather than your own merit." Alara considered the question carefully before responding. "It did, at first, but I have come to realize that opportunities often arrive through unexpected doors. What matters is what I choose to do once I am standing inside the room." Her father nodded approvingly, pride evident in his expression. "Your mother would be proud of how you have handled everything, Alara. I know I certainly am." The mention of her late mother brought a familiar ache to Alara's chest, though it was softened now by the warmth of her father's words. She had lost her mother several years earlier, and in many ways, the confidence and resilience she now carried had been shaped by lessons her mother had instilled in her long before the events of the royal ball had ever unfolded. That evening, as promised, Alaric arrived to escort Alara to the Duchess's gathering. He looked every bit the composed nobleman the court had come to expect, dressed in deep navy attire that complemented his sharp features, though the warmth in his eyes softened considerably the moment he saw her descending the staircase. "You look radiant," he said, offering his arm as she reached the bottom step. "Thank you," Alara replied, feeling a flutter of nervous excitement at the prospect of the evening ahead. "I confess I am somewhat anxious about attending such a gathering. Duchess Winthrop's reputation for sharp observation precedes her." "She will like you," Alaric said confidently. "Cordelia respects strength and honesty above titles or wealth. You possess both in abundance." The gathering itself was smaller and more intimate than the grand royal ball had been, held within the elegant confines of Duchess Winthrop's private estate. Perhaps 24 guests mingled throughout the beautifully decorated rooms, engaging in quiet conversation over refreshments, a stark contrast to the overwhelming spectacle of the previous event that had so thoroughly altered the course of Alara's life. Duchess Cordelia Winthrop herself was a striking woman in her middle years, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a commanding presence that immediately drew attention whenever she entered a room. She approached Alara and Alaric shortly after their arrival, her expression carrying genuine curiosity rather than the polite indifference Alara had grown accustomed to receiving from members of the established nobility. "Miss Whitmore," Cordelia said, extending a hand in greeting. "I have heard a great deal about you these past several weeks. It seems you have made quite an impression on our reserved Duke here." "Your Grace," Alara replied, offering a respectful curtsy, "I am honored by the invitation. I hope I do not disappoint, whatever expectations may have been set." Cordelia's sharp eyes assessed her carefully for a long moment before a genuine smile broke across her features. "I doubt very much that you could disappoint anyone, my dear. I witnessed the events at the royal ball myself. The grace with which you handled such a public humiliation spoke volumes about your character. Far more, I might add, than the empty apologies and hollow status Lord Ashford seemed so preoccupied with chasing." "You are too kind, Your Grace," Alara said, warmth spreading through her chest at the unexpected praise. "Not kindness," Cordelia corrected, "simply honesty. Come, walk with me. I wish to hear more about your father's trading business. I understand it has grown considerably over the past several years." As the evening progressed, Alara found herself engaged in genuine, meaningful conversations with several members of the court's inner circle, each seemingly eager to hear her perspective on various matters, from trade policy to charitable initiatives the Duchess herself championed. Gone was the dismissive treatment she had once received as merely Julian's betrothed. In its place stood genuine curiosity and respect, earned not through inherited title, but through her own resilience and character. Across the room, Alaric watched her with quiet pride, occasionally catching her eye and offering a small, encouraging smile whenever she glanced in his direction. He remained close enough to offer support if needed, but deliberately allowed her the space to establish herself independently within these unfamiliar social circles. Later in the evening, as guests began mingling near the outdoor terrace overlooking the Duchess's expansive gardens, Alaric found a quiet moment alone with Alara beneath the soft glow of hanging lanterns. "You handled yourself beautifully tonight," he said softly, standing close beside her as they gazed out over the moonlit garden. "I had good support," Alara replied, glancing up at him with genuine affection. "Though I must admit, standing among such influential figures still feels somewhat surreal, given where I stood only a few short weeks ago. Life has a strange way of testing us before revealing our true strength," Alaric said thoughtfully. "I suspect you always possessed this resilience, Alara. It simply required the right circumstances to bring it fully into view." Alara turned to face him fully, studying the sincere warmth in his expression. "Alaric," she said softly, "I want to thank you truly for everything you have done. Not simply the legal assistance or the introductions to influential circles, but for believing in me when I struggled to believe in myself." "You never needed my belief to be worthy, Alara," he said gently. "But I am glad, nonetheless, that I could offer it." The moment stretched between them, charged with quiet tension neither seemed quite ready to name aloud. Alaric reached out, gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering briefly against her cheek. "May I be entirely honest with you?" he asked quietly. "Please," Alara whispered. "These past several weeks have changed something within me," Alaric admitted, his voice low and unusually vulnerable. "I have spent years guarding myself carefully against genuine attachment, convinced that solitude protected me from disappointment. But watching you rebuild your life with such grace and determination, I find myself wanting something I have not allowed myself to want in a very long time." Alara's heart raced as she absorbed his words, hardly daring to hope for what she suspected he might be suggesting. "And what is it you want, Alaric?" "You," he said simply, his gray eyes steady and sincere. "Not as a passing companion or a cause I championed out of principle, but as someone I genuinely wish to build a future alongside, should you be willing to consider such a possibility." Tears welled in Alara's eyes, though they carried none of the pain that had accompanied her tears weeks earlier. "Alaric, I have felt something building between us as well, something I did not expect to find so soon after everything that happened with Julian. But I confess, I am somewhat frightened by how quickly these feelings have grown." "Fear is understandable," Alaric said gently, taking her hands in his. "You have every right to move carefully, to protect your heart after everything you have endured. I do not ask for immediate certainty, Alara. I simply wished you to know the truth of my feelings, so that whatever happens between us moving forward, it happens with complete honesty." Alara squeezed his hands gently, feeling a warmth spread through her entire body despite the cool evening air surrounding them. "Thank you for your honesty," she said softly. "I believe, given time, I may come to feel the same certainty you already carry." Alaric smiled, genuine happiness lighting his usually reserved features. "That is all I could ask for." As they stood together beneath the soft glow of lantern light, the sounds of quiet conversation and gentle music drifting from the gathering behind them, Alara felt, for the first time since the disastrous night of the royal ball, that her life was finally moving in a direction shaped entirely by hope rather than fear. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to either of them, whispers of a very different nature had begun circulating through separate corners of the city. Whispers concerning the rapidly deteriorating financial situation of the Cross family, and the increasingly desperate position Julian Ashford now found himself trapped within as a result of his earlier decisions. The following morning, Julian received an urgent summons from Vivienne's father, Baron Cross, requesting an immediate private meeting at the Cross family estate. Sensing trouble, Julian arrived to find the Baron's expression grim, his usually confident demeanor replaced by visible strain. "Lord Ashford," Baron Cross began without preamble, "I must speak plainly, given the circumstances currently facing my family. Several of our business ventures have suffered significant losses over the past year, losses we have worked diligently to conceal from public knowledge. However, our creditors have grown increasingly impatient, and I fear the truth can no longer remain hidden." Julian felt his stomach tighten with growing dread. "What exactly are you telling me, Baron?" "I am telling you," the Baron said heavily, "that the alliance you sought through marriage to my daughter may no longer provide the advantages you originally anticipated. Our family's financial standing is far more precarious than public perception currently suggests, and I fear that reality will become widely known within the coming weeks." Julian sat in stunned silence, the full weight of his earlier decision crashing down around him with devastating clarity. He had abandoned Alara, a woman whose family's genuine, stable wealth had been secured through years of honest, diligent trade, in favor of an alliance built entirely upon carefully maintained illusion. "What do you propose we do?" Julian finally managed to ask. Baron Cross's expression remained grim. "I propose, Lord Ashford, that we proceed with caution regarding any formal engagement between yourself and my daughter until our family's financial situation stabilizes. I cannot, in good conscience, allow Vivienne to enter a marriage that may draw further attention and scrutiny to circumstances we are actively working to resolve." The message was unmistakable, though delivered with careful diplomatic language. The alliance Julian had sacrificed everything to secure was crumbling before it had even fully begun, leaving him with neither the stable partnership he had abandoned nor the advantageous elevation he had so desperately sought. As Julian left the Cross estate that afternoon, walking alone through the quiet streets rather than summoning his carriage, he found himself reflecting bitterly on the events of the past several weeks. He thought of Alara's composed grace at the royal ball, of the settlement negotiations where she had shown genuine fairness despite every reason to seek harsher punishment, and of the growing rumors suggesting her increasingly prominent association with Duke Alaric Sinclair. Everything he had once dismissed as insignificant, loyalty, genuine partnership, honest character, now revealed itself as far more valuable than the empty status he had so recklessly pursued. And as autumn deepened into the cooler months ahead, Julian Ashford began to understand, with growing clarity, exactly how thoroughly his own ambition had cost him everything that had truly mattered. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the city in a soft layer of frost that clung to window panes, and turned the palace gardens into a glittering, silver landscape. Alara had grown accustomed to the rhythm of her new life, one that balanced quiet mornings assisting her father's growing trade correspondence with increasingly frequent afternoons spent in the company of Duke Alaric Sinclair, whose presence had become a steady, comforting constant amid the whirlwind changes of recent months. It was during one such afternoon, as snow fell gently outside the tall windows of Alaric's private library, that Alara found herself reflecting on how dramatically her circumstances had shifted since that fateful night at the royal ball. "You seem thoughtful today," Alaric observed, setting aside the book he had been reading to study her carefully from across the room. "I was simply thinking about how strange life can be," Alara admitted, curled comfortably in a chair near the crackling fireplace. "Only a few months ago, I believed my entire future had been destroyed beyond repair. Now, I find myself here in this library, feeling more genuinely content than I ever did during my engagement to Julian." Alaric rose from his seat and crossed the room, settling into the chair beside hers. "Contentment built on genuine connection tends to feel entirely different from obligation dressed up as partnership," he said gently. "I suspect you never truly experienced happiness with Julian, Alara. You experienced expectation." "That is remarkably perceptive," Alara replied, studying his face with quiet affection. "Though I suppose I should expect nothing less from you by now." Over the preceding weeks, their relationship had deepened steadily, built upon countless quiet conversations, shared laughter over afternoon tea, and the gradual dismantling of the careful emotional walls both had constructed long before their unlikely paths had crossed. Alara had come to know a version of Alaric that the rest of the court rarely witnessed: thoughtful, occasionally playful, and surprisingly vulnerable when discussing matters close to his heart. In turn, Alaric had watched Alara transform from a woman defined by public humiliation into someone increasingly confident in her own worth, no longer seeking validation through association with powerful figures, but rather standing firmly on the strength of her own character and accomplishments. "I received an interesting piece of correspondence this morning," Alaric mentioned, reaching for a folded letter resting on a nearby table. "It seems the royal court has taken notice of your father's recent trade agreements with several neighboring territories. There has been talk among certain council members of formally recognizing his contributions to the kingdom's economic growth." Alara's eyes widened with surprise. Formal recognition. That would mean a great deal to him, especially given how hard he has worked over the years to build something respectable for our family. "I suspect," Alaric added with a small smile, "that his daughter's growing reputation within court circles has not gone unnoticed either. Several influential figures have mentioned to me how impressed they have been by your composure and intelligence these past several months." A warm blush colored Alara's cheeks. "I hope such recognition is earned through genuine merit, rather than simply my association with you." "Alara," Alaric said seriously, taking her hand gently in his, "I want you to understand something clearly. I have introduced you to influential circles, yes, but every impression you have made since has been entirely your own doing. Your intelligence, your grace, your resilience, none of that belongs to me. It belongs entirely to you." Alara felt tears prick at her eyes, moved deeply by the sincerity in his words. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much it means to hear you say that." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the arrival of a servant, who informed Alaric that an unexpected visitor had arrived requesting an urgent audience. Moments later, Julian Ashford was shown into the library, his appearance noticeably different from the confident, composed nobleman Alara remembered from the night of the royal ball. His face carried visible strain, dark circles shadowing his eyes, and his usually immaculate attire appeared slightly disheveled. "Lord Ashford," Alaric said, rising from his seat with careful, measured politeness, "this is an unexpected visit." "Your Grace, Alara," Julian said, offering a stiff, uncertain bow. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. I would not have come if the matter were not urgent." "What has happened, Julian?" Alara asked, her tone cautious but not unkind. Julian hesitated, glancing briefly between the two of them before continuing. "The situation with the Cross family has grown considerably worse. Their financial troubles have become public knowledge, and Baron Cross has formally severed all discussion of a future engagement between myself and Vivienne. My family's reputation has suffered greatly as a result of the association." "I am sorry to hear that," Alara said, and she meant it, despite everything that had transpired between them. She had not wished true ruin upon Julian, only accountability for the pain he had caused her. "There is more," Julian continued, his voice growing quieter. "My father has informed me that our family's own financial standing has been affected by the failed alliance, combined with the settlement paid regarding our broken engagement. He believes it necessary for me to seek a stable, advantageous marriage as soon as possible to help restore our family's position." Alaric's expression remained carefully neutral, though Alara could sense a subtle tension building within him. "I fail to see how this concerns either of us, Lord Ashford." Julian took a steadying breath before continuing. "I came here today to formally apologize, Alara, not simply for the sake of easing my own guilt, but because I have come to genuinely understand the depth of the harm I caused you. I treated you as though your worth depended entirely on the advantages you could offer my own ambitions, and that was deeply, profoundly wrong of me." Alara studied him carefully, searching for any trace of manipulation or self-interest hidden beneath his words. She found, to her surprise, genuine remorse, tempered by the harsh lessons circumstance had forced him to learn. "I appreciate your apology, Julian," she said finally. "I hope, truly, that you find your way toward better choices moving forward, choices guided by genuine character rather than mere ambition." Julian nodded slowly, gratitude evident in his tired expression. "Thank you, Alara. That is more grace than I likely deserve, given everything that happened." As Julian prepared to take his leave, he paused at the doorway, glancing back toward Alara and Alaric with an expression that carried both regret and quiet acceptance. "I can see now," he said softly, "exactly what I lost that night and exactly what I chose instead. I hope in time I can become someone worthy of the lessons this experience has taught me." After Julian departed, a heavy silence settled over the library. Alara moved closer to Alaric, seeking comfort in his steady presence after the unexpected emotional weight of the encounter. "Are you all right?" Alaric asked gently, wrapping a comforting arm around her shoulders. "I am," Alara said, resting her head against him. "It is strange, seeing him so humbled after everything that happened. I do not feel triumphant exactly. Simply relieved, I suppose, that some measure of understanding has finally reached him." "You have a remarkably generous heart," Alaric said softly, pressing a gentle kiss against her forehead. "Many would have taken far greater satisfaction in his downfall." "Perhaps," Alara replied, "but I have found greater peace in building something genuine with you than I ever would have found in dwelling upon his mistakes." Over the following weeks, word of Julian's humbled apology and the continued deterioration of the Cross family's fortunes spread quietly through court circles, further reinforcing the growing perception of Alara as a woman of remarkable grace and resilience. Meanwhile, her relationship with Alaric continued to deepen, moving steadily from quiet companionship toward something neither of them could deny represented genuine, lasting love. One particularly cold evening, as snow blanketed the city streets outside, Alaric invited Alara and her father to a private dinner at his estate. Throughout the evening, conversation flowed easily between the three of them, filled with genuine warmth and laughter that Alara had once believed impossible to find within the rigid social structures of the royal court. After dinner, as her father excused himself to review some correspondence in a nearby study, Alaric led Alara toward the grand foyer overlooking the softly falling snow outside. "Alara," he said, his voice carrying a note of nervous anticipation she had rarely heard from him before, "there is something I wish to discuss with you, something I have been considering carefully these past several weeks." "What is it?" Alara asked, studying his face with growing curiosity. Alaric reached into his coat pocket, withdrawing a small, elegant box. Alara's breath caught as she realized what he was about to do. "I know it has only been a few months since we first met," Alaric said, his composed demeanor giving way to genuine, heartfelt vulnerability. "But I have never been more certain of anything in my life than I am of my feelings for you. You have shown me a version of happiness I long believed myself incapable of experiencing, and I find myself unwilling to imagine a future without you standing beside me." Alara's eyes filled with tears as she watched him lower himself onto one knee, opening the small box to reveal a delicate, elegant ring that caught the soft candlelight of the foyer. "Alara Whitmore," Alaric said softly, "will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" For a moment, Alara could hardly find her voice, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion swelling within her chest. She thought of the humiliation she had endured months earlier, the public heartbreak that had once seemed like the darkest moment of her entire life. And now, standing before her, was proof that even the deepest pain could give way to unexpected, extraordinary joy. "Yes," she finally whispered, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. "Yes, Alaric, I will marry you." Alaric rose to his feet, gently sliding the ring onto her trembling finger before pulling her into a warm, tender embrace. As they stood together in the softly lit foyer, snow continuing to fall gently outside the tall windows, Alara felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over her. Gratitude not for the humiliation she had once suffered, but for the unexpected, beautiful path that painful moment had ultimately led her toward. The story that had begun with public heartbreak at the royal ball was now, at long last, transforming into something far more beautiful than either of them could have ever anticipated. News of the engagement between Duke Alaric Sinclair and Alara Whitmore spread through the royal court with remarkable speed, reaching every drawing room and dinner party within days of the announcement being made official. Unlike the whispers that had once painted Alara as a pitiable figure abandoned at the royal ball, this new wave of gossip carried an entirely different tone, one filled with genuine admiration and quiet astonishment at how completely her fortunes had transformed. Duchess Cordelia Winthrop, upon hearing the news, personally called upon Alara to offer her congratulations, arriving at the Whitmore household with a warmth that surprised even Alara's father. "I must say, my dear," Cordelia remarked as she settled into the drawing room, "I have rarely witnessed a more satisfying turn of events within our court's long history of gossip and scandal. From public humiliation to a genuine, well-earned engagement with one of the most respected men in the entire kingdom. It is the sort of story that reminds even jaded souls like myself why hope remains worth holding on to. I owe a great deal of that transformation to your kindness, your grace," Alara replied warmly. "Your willingness to welcome me into your circle meant more than you likely realize." "Nonsense," Cordelia said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I simply recognized genuine character when I saw it. The rest, my dear, you accomplished entirely on your own merit." Meanwhile, across the city, the situation for Julian Ashford and his family continued its steady decline. With the Cross family's financial troubles now widely known throughout court circles, and no advantageous alliance remaining to help restore the Ashford family standing, Lord Reginald found himself forced to make increasingly difficult decisions regarding the family's remaining assets and business ventures. "We must reduce our household expenses significantly," Reginald informed Julian during a tense conversation held in the family's now noticeably less opulent study. "Several of our investments have underperformed this past year, and without a stabilizing marriage alliance to offset those losses, I fear we must adjust our expectations considerably." Julian listened in silence, the weight of his earlier decisions settling upon him with increasing clarity. He thought often, during these difficult weeks, of the life he might have led had he honored his commitment to Alara rather than pursuing what he had once believed represented a superior opportunity. At a smaller gathering hosted by one of the few remaining acquaintances still willing to extend an invitation to the increasingly diminished Ashford family, Julian found himself seated near Edmund Caro, his loyal friend who had remained steadfast despite the family's declining fortunes. "You seem more at peace than I expected, given everything that has happened," Edmund observed, studying his friend carefully over their glasses of wine. "Strange as it sounds," Julian replied thoughtfully, "I believe I am beginning to understand something important through all of this difficulty. I spent so many years chasing status, believing it represented the truest measure of a successful life. Now, watching Alara build genuine happiness through authentic connection rather than calculated advantage, I find myself questioning everything I once believed mattered most." "That sounds like genuine growth, Julian," Edmund said with a small, encouraging smile. "Painful, certainly, but genuine nonetheless." "Perhaps," Julian said, staring thoughtfully into his glass, "though I fear such wisdom has come at considerable cost, both to my family's standing and to my own peace of mind." As winter deepened further, preparations for Alara and Alaric's upcoming wedding began in earnest, filling the Whitmore and Sinclair households alike with a flurry of joyful activity. Alara found herself increasingly occupied with wedding preparations, consultations regarding attire, venue arrangements, and the countless small details required for a ceremony that would undoubtedly draw significant attention from across the entire kingdom. During one particularly busy afternoon spent reviewing wedding arrangements alongside Alaric within his private study, Alara paused thoughtfully, studying the man who had so thoroughly transformed her once shattered future. "Alaric," she said softly, drawing his attention away from the seating arrangements they had been discussing. "May I share something with you?" "Always," he replied, setting aside the documents and giving her his full attention. "I have been reflecting recently on everything that has happened since that night at the royal ball," Alara began carefully. "At the time, I believed my life had been irreparably destroyed. Now, preparing to marry a man I love more deeply than I ever imagined possible, I find myself grateful, in a strange and unexpected way, for the painful path that ultimately led me here." Alaric reached across the small distance between them, gently taking her hand in his. "Pain often serves as an unexpected teacher, showing us truths we might never have discovered otherwise. Had Julian never abandoned you so publicly, our paths may never have crossed at all." "That is precisely what I have been considering," Alara said with a soft, thoughtful smile. "Perhaps every painful ending carries within it the seeds of an entirely unexpected, beautiful beginning." Their quiet reflection was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Bennet, who entered the study carrying additional legal documents, requiring Alaric's attention regarding the formal transfer of certain estate holdings in preparation for the upcoming marriage. "Your Grace, Miss Whitmore," Bennet greeted them politely, "I apologize for the interruption, but there are several matters requiring your review before the wedding proceedings can be finalized." As Alaric turned his attention toward the legal documents, Alara found herself reflecting further on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. The humiliation she had once endured, the fear and uncertainty that had gripped her during those difficult early weeks, all of it now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed entirely by the genuine happiness she had found through unexpected circumstances. That evening, as Alara prepared for bed within the familiar comfort of her family home, her father knocked gently on her bedroom door, entering with a warm, contemplative expression. "I wanted to speak with you privately," Thomas Whitmore said, settling into a chair near her window, "before the wedding preparations consume all our remaining time together as father and daughter under this roof." "Of course, father," Alara said, sitting beside him with genuine curiosity. "I have watched you endure tremendous hardship these past several months," her father began, his voice carrying deep emotion. "The humiliation of that terrible night, the uncertainty that followed, the courage it required to rebuild your confidence and reputation from such a devastating public setback. I want you to know how profoundly proud I am of the woman you have become through all of it." Tears welled in Alara's eyes as she absorbed her father's heartfelt words. "Thank you, father. I could not have found the strength to move forward without your unwavering support throughout everything." "Your mother would be immensely proud as well," Thomas continued softly. "She always believed you possessed remarkable inner strength, even during your childhood years. I confess, I did not fully understand the depth of that strength, until I watched you reclaim your life so gracefully after everything Julian put you through." "I love you, father," Alara said, embracing him warmly. "I love you too, my dear girl," Thomas replied, holding her close. "And I could not imagine a more worthy man than Alaric Sinclair to stand beside you as you begin this next beautiful chapter of your life." As winter gradually gave way to the first gentle signs of approaching spring, the kingdom's attention turned increasingly toward the highly anticipated wedding between Duke Alaric Sinclair and Alara Whitmore, an event that promised to be among the most celebrated social occasions the royal court had witnessed in recent memory. Meanwhile, in a quieter corner of the same court, Julian Ashford continued navigating the difficult reality of his family's diminished circumstances, slowly learning, through hardship and reflection, the valuable lessons that genuine character and loyalty ultimately mattered far more than the hollow pursuit of status and advantage he had once so recklessly prioritized above everything else. Though his path forward remained uncertain, and the road toward genuine redemption would undoubtedly require considerable time and effort, Julian found himself, for the first time in years, genuinely committed to becoming a better version of himself, guided not by ambition alone, but by the painful yet valuable lessons his own mistakes had taught him. As preparations for the wedding continued, drawing ever closer to the joyful celebration that awaited. Alara Whitmore stood firmly at the threshold of a future she had once believed entirely impossible, ready to embrace a lifetime of genuine love, mutual respect, and unwavering partnership alongside the man who had chosen, without hesitation, to stand beside her during her darkest hour. Spring arrived early that year, painting the palace gardens in soft shades of green and gold, the perfect backdrop for the wedding that the entire kingdom had spent months anticipating. The royal chapel had been transformed into something breathtaking. Garlands of fresh flowers draped elegantly along every pillar, soft morning light filtering through the tall, stained glass windows to cast gentle colors across the gathered guests. Alara stood in a private chamber adjoining the chapel, her heart racing with a mixture of nervous excitement and overwhelming joy as Margaret carefully adjusted the delicate lace veil framing her face. The gown she wore had been crafted specifically for this occasion, ivory silk embroidered with subtle silver thread that caught the light with every gentle movement, a stark and beautiful contrast to the golden gown she had worn the night everything had first fallen apart. "You look absolutely radiant, miss," Margaret said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I have never seen you so happy." "I have never felt so happy, Margaret," Alara replied softly, studying her own reflection in the tall mirror before her. The woman staring back at her bore little resemblance to the humiliated figure who had once stood frozen in the middle of a ballroom, abandoned and ashamed. This woman stood tall, confident, and genuinely radiant with anticipation for the future awaiting her. A gentle knock sounded at the door, and her father entered, dressed elegantly for the occasion, his expression carrying deep, heartfelt emotion as he took in the sight of his daughter prepared for her wedding day. "You look just like your mother did on our own wedding day," Thomas Whitmore said, his voice thick with emotion. "She would be so proud of you, Alara, watching you walk toward a future built on genuine love rather than mere obligation." "Thank you, father," Alara said, embracing him gently, careful not to disturb her carefully arranged gown. "I could not have reached this moment without your unwavering support." "Are you ready, my dear?" Thomas asked, offering his arm. Alara took a steadying breath, feeling the weight of everything that had brought her to this moment, the pain, the uncertainty, the slow rebuilding of her confidence, and finally the unexpected discovery of genuine love where she had least anticipated finding it. "I am ready," she said with quiet certainty. As the chapel doors opened and the wedding march began to play, Alara walked slowly down the aisle beside her father, past rows of gathered guests representing nearly every influential family within the kingdom. She caught sight of Duchess Cordelia Winthrop near the front, offering an encouraging smile, and further back, she noticed Julian Ashford seated quietly among the guests, his expression carrying genuine, humbled respect rather than any lingering resentment. At the end of the aisle, standing tall and composed beside the officiant, Duke Alaric Sinclair watched her approach, with an expression of pure, unguarded adoration that sent warmth spreading through her entire body. Gone entirely was the reserved, cautious demeanor the court had once believed defined him completely. In its place stood a man utterly transformed by genuine love, unafraid to display his emotions openly before the very court that had once viewed him as unreachable. As Alara reached the front of the chapel and her father gently placed her hand into Alaric's waiting grasp, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace settle over her, a certainty that every painful step of her difficult journey had ultimately led her precisely where she was always meant to be. "You look absolutely breathtaking," Alaric whispered as the ceremony began, his gray eyes shining with genuine emotion. "You look rather handsome yourself," Alara whispered back, unable to suppress the joyful smile spreading across her face. Throughout the ceremony, as they exchanged heartfelt vows before the gathered court and the kingdom's most respected religious officiant, Alara found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. The humiliation of that fateful night at the royal ball, once the darkest experience of her entire life, had ultimately set into motion a chain of events that led her toward genuine happiness far exceeding anything she could have imagined during her engagement to Julian. When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, the chapel erupted into joyful applause, guests rising from their seats to celebrate the union of two people whose unlikely story had captivated the entire kingdom over the preceding months. Alaric gently lifted Alara's veil, gazing at her with an expression of pure devotion, before leaning down to seal their union with a tender, heartfelt kiss. The wedding celebration that followed within the palace's grand ballroom, the very same room where Alara had once suffered her most painful public humiliation, felt entirely transformed by the joyful energy filling every corner. Musicians played lively melodies, laughter and celebration echoing throughout the elegant space, guests mingling happily as they offered congratulations to the newly married couple. During a quiet moment amid the festivities, Alara found herself standing near the same tall windows where Alaric had first approached her all those months earlier, offering comfort and support during her darkest hour. She smiled softly at the memory, marveling at how thoroughly her circumstances had transformed since that fateful night. "Remembering something?" Alaric asked, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of champagne. "I was simply thinking about how different this room feels now compared to that terrible night," Alara admitted, accepting the glass he offered. "It is remarkable, truly, how the same place can hold such contrasting memories." "Perhaps that is fitting," Alaric said thoughtfully. "This room witnessed your deepest heartbreak, and now it has witnessed the beginning of what I intend to be a lifetime of genuine happiness between us." As the evening progressed, Julian approached the couple briefly, offering sincere congratulations alongside a small, thoughtfully chosen gift. "I wish you both genuine happiness," he said, his voice carrying quiet sincerity. "You deserve it, Alara, more than anyone I have ever known." "Thank you, Julian," Alara replied warmly, genuinely touched by his sincerity. "I hope you find your own path toward happiness as well, guided by the lessons this experience has taught you." "I am working toward that," Julian said with a small, humble smile, slowly but genuinely. As night fell over the palace grounds and the celebration continued late into the evening, Alara found herself dancing joyfully in her husband's arms, surrounded by the warm glow of countless candles and the genuine well-wishes of a court that had watched her transform from a figure of pity into a woman of remarkable strength and grace. Later, as the celebration finally began winding down and guests slowly departed into the cool spring night, Alaric led Alara out onto a private balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens below, the same gardens where she had once sought refuge during her darkest moment of humiliation. "I have something for you," Alaric said softly, reaching into his coat pocket and withdrawing a small, elegant locket. Alara opened it carefully, discovering a miniature portrait of herself and Alaric, painted during one of their quiet afternoons together in his library. "It is beautiful," she whispered, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. "I wanted you to always remember this day," Alaric said, gently fastening the locket around her neck. "Not simply as the day we married, but as the day we truly began building our future together, guided entirely by genuine love rather than obligation or circumstance." Alara turned to face her husband, her heart overflowing with gratitude and joy. "Thank you, Alaric, for everything. For seeing my worth when I struggled to see it myself, for standing beside me during my darkest hour, and for showing me that genuine love could exist beyond the empty pursuit of status and ambition." "Thank you," Alaric replied softly, "for trusting me with your heart, and for teaching me that genuine happiness was worth the risk of vulnerability I had spent so many years avoiding." As they stood together beneath the soft glow of moonlight, surrounded by the fragrant blooms of the palace gardens, Alara felt an overwhelming sense of peace and gratitude wash over her entire being. The painful humiliation she had once suffered, the devastating public heartbreak that had felt, at the time, like the absolute end of everything she had hoped for, had ultimately led her toward a future far more beautiful and genuine than anything she could have imagined during her engagement to Julian. Somewhere across the palace grounds, the last remnants of the wedding celebration continued their gentle fade into the quiet night, the joyful echoes of music and laughter slowly giving way to peaceful silence. And within the private sanctuary of the moonlit balcony, Duke Alaric Sinclair and his new Duchess, Alara Sinclair, stood together, hand in hand, ready to embrace whatever beautiful future awaited them, built entirely upon the foundation of genuine love, mutual respect, and unwavering loyalty that had blossomed unexpectedly from the ashes of public humiliation. The story that had begun with heartbreak and betrayal at the royal ball had at last found its truest, most beautiful conclusion, proof that even the darkest moments of pain could ultimately give way to unexpected joy, provided one possessed the courage and resilience to keep moving forward, one graceful step at a time. A full year passed since the wedding that had captivated the entire kingdom, and life within the Sinclair estate had settled into a rhythm filled with genuine warmth, quiet joy, and the steady growth of a partnership built on mutual respect. Alara had continued to expand her presence within court circles, no longer known simply as the woman once abandoned at a royal ball, but respected in her own right as the Duchess of Sinclair, a title she carried with humility and grace rather than arrogance. Her father's trading business had flourished considerably over the past year, the formal recognition from the Royal Council opening new opportunities across neighboring territories. Thomas Whitmore often visited the Sinclair estate, delighting in the close relationship he continued to share with his daughter, and the genuine friendship that had developed between himself and his son-in-law. Duchess Cordelia Winthrop remained a steady presence in Alara's life as well, the two women having formed a genuine friendship that extended well beyond their initial meeting at that pivotal winter gathering. Cordelia often remarked, with characteristic bluntness, that Alara's rise within court society stood as proof that genuine character would always outlast temporary status built on empty ambition. Julian Ashford, meanwhile, had spent the past year working diligently to rebuild both his family's finances and his own reputation. Though the Ashford family's standing within the court remained diminished compared to its former prominence, Julian had thrown himself into managing what remained of the family's business ventures with newfound dedication and humility. He had, notably, avoided pursuing any further advantageous marriage alliances, choosing instead to focus on rebuilding genuine trust among those he had once carelessly disregarded. During a chance encounter at a charitable gathering hosted by Duchess Winthrop, Alara found herself speaking briefly with Julian once again, the conversation carrying none of the tension that had once defined their interactions. "You seem well," Alara observed, genuinely pleased to see the visible change in his demeanor. "I am working toward becoming a better man," Julian replied honestly. "It has been a difficult year, filled with hard lessons, but I believe I am finally beginning to understand what truly matters." "I am glad to hear that," Alara said sincerely. "Everyone deserves the opportunity to grow beyond their past mistakes." As their brief conversation concluded, Alara returned to Alaric's side, reflecting quietly on how thoroughly the events of the past year had transformed not only her own life, but the lives of everyone connected to that fateful night at the royal ball. Spring gave way to summer, and with it came news that filled the Sinclair household with even greater joy. Alara discovered she was expecting their first child, a revelation that brought Alaric to tears of genuine happiness when she shared the news during a quiet evening in his private study. "A child," Alaric said softly, gently placing his hand against her still flat stomach with reverent tenderness. "Alara, I never imagined I could feel such complete happiness." "Neither did I," Alara admitted, smiling through her own tears of joy. "Though I suppose our entire journey together has been filled with unexpected blessings, arriving from the most unlikely circumstances." As the months progressed, and Alara's pregnancy became increasingly evident, the entire court seemed to embrace the news with genuine warmth, gifts and well-wishes arriving steadily from families across the kingdom eager to celebrate the growing Sinclair family. Duchess Cordelia insisted on hosting a celebration in Alara's honor, filling the palace gardens with laughter, music, and heartfelt congratulations from friends both old and new. Thomas Whitmore, overwhelmed with joy at the prospect of becoming a grandfather, spent countless hours discussing potential names with his daughter, reminiscing fondly about Alara's own childhood, while eagerly anticipating the arrival of the next generation of their family. When winter arrived once again, nearly a full year after their joyful wedding celebration, Alara gave birth to a healthy daughter, whom she and Alaric named Rosalind, in honor of Alara's late mother, whose memory continued to guide and inspire her throughout every significant moment of her transformed life. Holding their newborn daughter for the first time within the warm, candle-lit comfort of their private chambers, Alaric turned to Alara with an expression of overwhelming love and gratitude. "She has your eyes," he said softly, gazing down at the small, sleeping infant cradled gently in his arms. "And your quiet strength, I suspect," Alara replied, exhaustion mingling with pure, radiant joy as she watched her husband hold their daughter with such tender care. "Thank you," Alaric said, looking up to meet her gaze with deep sincerity, "for choosing to trust me all those months ago when your world had been so thoroughly shattered. I do not know how I ever managed before you brought such genuine happiness into my life." "We found each other exactly when we needed to," Alara said softly, reaching out to gently take her husband's hand. "Perhaps that painful night at the royal ball was simply the universe's way of guiding us toward the life we were always meant to share." As their small family settled into the peaceful rhythm of new parenthood, word of baby Rosalind's arrival spread joyfully throughout the kingdom, further cementing the Sinclair family's beloved standing within court society. Letters of congratulations arrived from every corner of the realm, including, somewhat unexpectedly, a heartfelt note from Julian Ashford himself, offering genuine well wishes for the growing family's continued happiness. Years later, as young Rosalind grew into a curious, spirited child who delighted in exploring the vast gardens of the Sinclair estate, Alara often found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had shaped her entire life. She would sit with her daughter beneath the same tall windows where she had once sought refuge during her darkest hour, sharing gentle stories about resilience, genuine character, and the quiet courage required to rebuild one's life after devastating heartbreak. "Someday," Alara would tell her daughter, "you may face moments that feel impossibly difficult, moments where the whole world seems to be watching your greatest humiliation unfold. But I want you to always remember, my darling girl, that even the most painful endings can pave the way toward unexpected, beautiful beginnings, provided you have the courage to keep moving forward with grace and genuine hope." Alaric, watching these tender moments between mother and daughter with quiet pride, often reflected on how thoroughly his own life had transformed since that fateful winter evening at the royal ball. He had once believed himself destined for a life of solitary duty, disconnected from genuine emotional attachment. Instead, he had found, through the most unexpected circumstances, a partnership built on authentic love, mutual respect, and unwavering loyalty, a family that brought him more genuine joy than he had ever believed possible. The story that had begun with public humiliation, betrayal, and heartbreak had ultimately transformed into something far more meaningful than either Alara or Alaric could have anticipated during those painful early days. Their journey stood as a quiet testament to the resilience of the human spirit, proof that genuine character, patience, and unwavering hope could triumph even in the face of the most devastating public humiliation. And so, within the peaceful walls of the Sinclair estate, surrounded by genuine love, mutual respect, and the joyful laughter of their growing family, Alara and Alaric continued building a life together defined not by the painful betrayal that had once threatened to define Alara's future, but by the extraordinary, unexpected love that had ultimately risen from those very ashes, proving, once and for all, that even the darkest moments of heartbreak could lead toward the most beautiful, unforeseen destinations imaginable.